What if some of the things we confidently call scientific facts are actually just unspoken assumptions? Seriously, imagine for a second that the bedrock of our modern understanding of the universe isn't entirely made of proven laws, but is instead built, well, partly on a foundation of centuries-old beliefs. It's a pretty powerful, honestly kind of unsettling question, and it immediately builds this fascinating intellectual mystery that forces us to look a lot closer at what we think we know. You see, one of the absolute greatest scientific controversies of our time didn't start with, the discovery of a new fossil or some distant galaxy. It started with an explosive conflict between established scientific truths and hidden metaphysical beliefs. It was literally a controversy about questioning the very foundations of science itself, triggering an intense, massive debate that just rippled right through the academic world. So today, we're taking an objective look into a highly controversial critique of modern science, the 10 scientific assumptions Rupert Sheldrake wants you to question. Whether you view him as a brilliant visionary or just a misguided rebel, his work is undeniably influential, and it sparks a debate we really can't ignore. We're going to explore exactly what he believes, why he believes it, and why the scientific establishment pushes back so fiercely.
Okay, let's dive right into this with part 1, the rebel's science delusion. First off, Rupert Sheldrake isn't some outsider to science. His background is deeply, deeply rooted in the establishment. I mean, he studied biochemistry at Cambridge, philosophy of science at Harvard, and he was even a research fellow at the Royal Society. But as a biologist, he became really dissatisfied with conventional, purely mechanistic explanations of life. That whole journey culminated in a bombshell book, The Science Delusion, which was published in the US as Science Set Free. His central thesis here is bold. He argues that science is actually being held back by a set of centuries-old assumptions that have quietly hardened into untouchable dogmas. To understand this, we need to see how Sheldrake draws a sharp line between two very different concepts. On one side, we have science, the method of free, open inquiry, testing hypotheses, and just following the evidence wherever it leads. But on the other side, we have scientism, which he describes as a rigid, materialist belief system, almost like an ideology. Sheldrake claims that many scientists just absorb this materialist worldview by basically intellectual osmosis. They end up treating it as unquestionable truth rather than an assumption that should be rigorously tested.
Which brings us to part 2. 10 Dogmas of Modern Science.
So Sheldrake takes this standard materialist worldview and breaks it down into distinct beliefs that govern conventional scientific thinking today. Mainstream science largely assumes things like nature is purely mechanical, matter is entirely unconscious, the laws of nature are eternally fixed, the universe itself is purposeless, and our minds are absolutely nothing more than physical activity confined inside our brains. Now, Sheldrake asks us to pause here and really reflect. Does a purely dead, purposeless universe actually make sense of our lived, day-to-day experience? Or is it just a theoretical framework that we've all simply been taught to accept?
And this brilliantly illustrates the conventional view. Consider this famous quote by evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins. "We are survival machines, robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecules known as genes." This is really the pinnacle of the materialist view, right? Viewing organisms as biological machines. Sheldrake neutrally points out that while this metaphor has definitely driven incredible technological progress, for sure, it also forces us to completely dismiss our intuitive sense that animals, plants, and humans are living organisms with their own intrinsic purposes.
Moving on to part 3, the morphic resonance mystery.
So, if the universe isn't just a dead machine running on fixed mathematical laws, well then what is it? Sheldrake's answer is a fascinating concept he calls morphic resonance. This is the hypothesis that self-organizing systems, we're talking molecules, cells, or even entire animal societies, actually inherit a collective memory from all past similar systems. So instead of eternally fixed mathematical laws, Sheldrake believes nature relies more on evolving habits. Under this theory, a spider knows how to spin a web not just because of genetic programming, but because it's literally tuning into the collective memory of all the spiders that came before it. Wild, right?
Now, to explain how memories and the mind might be transmitted across time and space without being stored locally in the brain, Sheldrake uses this brilliant analogy. Imagine a TV set, and that TV represents your brain. The TV receives an invisible signal, which represents the mind. Now, a materialist scientist could come along, damage the TV's internal wires, and observe that the picture on the screen distorts or completely disappears. They would naturally conclude, the wires create the picture. But Sheldrake argues, wait, this only proves the TV is a receiver. It definitely doesn't prove the TV actually generated the broadcast. He suggests our brains might just tune into memories via morphic resonance, rather than storing them locally as chemical traces.
Now let's get into part 4, the battle over scientism.
As you can probably guess, when Sheldrake published these ideas, it caused a massive, massive academic storm. To conventional scientists, proposing invisible fields of memory and questioning the mechanical nature of the universe isn't just wrong, it's seen as a highly dangerous step backward into superstition. To really understand the intense stakes here, just look at Francis Crick, the Nobel-winning co-discoverer of DNA. His driving motivation was famously said to be to knock the final nail into the coffin of vitalism, vitalism being the old idea that life is driven by non-mechanical forces. This just goes to show the militant desire within orthodox science to completely defeat non-material explanations, and honestly, to protect the hard-won victories of the 20th century scientific revolution.
And this brings up a really fascinating dynamic regarding skepticism. Sheldrake argues that the scientific community sometimes confuses two very different types of skepticism. On one side, we have skepticism as inquiry, the healthy testing of theories to actually find the truth. But on the other hand, there's skepticism as a weapon, which is using the authority of science to just protect established dogmas from heretical ideas without ever actually engaging with the evidence. Sheldrake claims that a lot of his critics just dismiss his experiments right out of hand simply because the results violate their materialist assumptions.
All right, part 5. What if he is right?
So, what if he is right? If Sheldrake's theories of an interconnected, memory-driven universe actually hold true, the consequences for human knowledge would be absolutely staggering. Think about it. In biology, inheritance wouldn't just be about DNA anymore. It would rely on invisible resonance from our ancestors. In psychology, the whole search for physical memory traces in the brain would basically become obsolete, because we'd realize we simply tune in to our past selves. And when it comes to human potential, unexplained phenomena like that weird sense of being stared at, or the intuitive connection between a dog and its owner, those wouldn't just be dismissed as paranormal magic. They would be studied as normal, observable biology. The crucial point is it suggests we are not just isolated machines. We are living organisms, connected to a vast, invisible web of collective memory. And this matters deeply. Why? Because it bridges that painful gap between the cold, mechanical explanations science currently gives us and the vibrant, interconnected personal experiences we actually have as human beings living in the natural world. Finally, part 6, when assumption becomes dogma. Sheldrake notes that the biggest scientific delusion of all is this idea that science already knows all the answers. He's really calling out what he terms the fantasy of omniscience. Because, let's be real, true scientific inquiry requires immense humility. It requires the courage to admit what we simply do not know, and the openness to realize that our current models of physics and biology are exactly that. They're models. They are not the final, unalterable truth of the cosmos. At the end of the day, whether you think Rupert Sheldrake is a brilliant visionary or a completely misguided iconoclast, his work demands that we ask ourselves a pretty tough question. How do we know when a scientific assumption has quietly become a dogma? Are we truly following the evidence of an open inquiry, or are we just defending the traditions of a worldview? It's a question that challenges the very boundaries of human knowledge, and I really hope it leaves you eager to dig deeper into the incredible mysteries of our universe.